Hello YouTube, this is Lance Cannibal, and I am going to be finishing my series on how to take apart the 1911. The previous video I did was how to take out the components within the slide. This video I'm going to be focused on the frame. To save time, I've already taken off the grip panels, which if you can't figure that out, then I really can't help you, because it's 4 screws, whether they're hex screws or just regular screws or Phillips head or whatever. They're pretty easy to take off if you can't figure that out. I don't even know how you figured out how to get on the internet. So basically, to start off with, you're going to take off the mainspring housing. Yours might be arched, it might be flat, it might be that crazy looking bobtail now, but that's what you need to focus on first. And to do that, you only have one pin, which is right here down at the bottom. So with a punch or an Allen key or whatever you might have, just kind of take the punch and drive that pin through the frame, like so. Now when you do this, you want to make sure that the hammer is down. You do not want the hammer cocked, because the hammer strut that is attached to the hammer rides down through the frame into the mainspring housing. So if you have the hammer cocked, there's going to be a hell of a lot of tension on this mainspring housing. And if you try to drive that pin through, you're going to have a hell of a time, because there's a lot of tension on that. So always make sure the hammer's forward. That way you can take the main housing spring, little assembly thing here, take that out. From there, I usually cock the hammer, and that way I can take out the thumb safety. And when you take the thumb safety out, you're always going to want to make sure that you keep your thumb back here. I just started it without actually putting my thumb back there, but it's a good practice to do, because this plunger assembly right here has a spring and 2 components. The component back here is what basically acts as like a kind of puts friction on the thumb safety, so when you manipulate it up or down, it keeps it in place. This little thing back here, which you can't really see, it's just this little tiny nipple that sticks out. It's part of the same spring and 2 pieces, and that basically puts tension on your slide stop. So regardless, there's spring tension in here. So when you take this thumb safety out, that spring's going to want to shoot out. So if you keep your thumb in the back there while you're wiggling your thumb safety out, that way it doesn't shoot out. So you take the thumb safety out, and when you do that, you'll be able to take your grip safety away from the frame. And then you can take out your leaf spring in the back. To take out the hammer, there is a pin that you must push up from. You take that out, the hammer comes right out along with the hammer strut. And the last pin that you need to worry yourself with, once you take that out, your sear and your disconnector come out from the bottom. Now when you put the disconnector back up into the frame, you'll notice that the bottom has kind of like a little ridge right there, and you're going to want to have that facing away from the back of the frame. And up into the frame, you can see the hole right here that I am kind of moving my finger back and forth from. That's where that's going to slide up through. So again, like I said, you're going to want to have that little ridge facing just like that, facing away from the back of the frame. And when you put this up, it's best to do it as it's 2 parts. As you can see, you've got a hole back here in the disconnector, and in the sear, which you're going to want to have the sear with that kind of hook facing the same way as that ridge. And you'll see that with the 2 holes, you can match them up together, and that's where the pin goes through. So once you get that kind of put back together, you're going to ride it right up over the back of the trigger And if you just put your finger right there just to keep it in place, you can take your pin, and once you wiggle them around in a little bit, you can see how they're both going to fit together. And it takes a little patience and a little time, but it should go together pretty easily. As you can see, it pins all the way through and it's keeping both of them in line. And just in reverse operation, you can put your hammer back in by putting that pin in, and now your hammer's in place. From there, you can get your leaf spring. Make sure that strut is up so you can properly put in the leaf spring. And when you put in the leaf spring, you can see that there's one side that has kind of a little notch, and then there's also a kind of a notch milled out in the frame. That's where that little tab goes into. And the longest of the leaves that has this kind of little notch or foot right there with my index finger, you're going to ride that up onto the sear. And once you get it up there in place, it kind of is foolproof. You'll see what I mean. It's kind of hard to see in the camera, but it kind of has that, just kind of sits in there nice and perfect, and you'll kind of understand what I'm talking about. And you can just rotate that hammer strut back down onto that middle leaf, and from there you can then fit your grip safety back into the slide, and then you can rotate your hammer down. That's what I normally do, and that way you can get your thumb safety back into the frame. And that just goes into that pin with the grip safety. This takes a little trial and error, but once you get that in, you then have to deal with this plunger tube that I was talking about earlier, and it kind of gets in the way right there. So you kind of have to push that back while you're pushing the grip safety back in, and that way you got the grip safety in and it's working along with the plunger. Now the okay, well, we're gonna have to do this kind of the hard way. Something's binding up with the hammer in there, but it's a real quick fix. Since the hammer's down, like I was saying before, and it's kind of a pain to get this back on, I'm going to show you can do it. Just got to get that strut lined up with the kind of piston inside this mainspring housing. All you got to do is just put some pressure down. You just push it down into the table or whatever solid work surface you're working on, and you'll be able to get that pin back in. And then with like a rubber mallet, you can kind of just pop that back in. And now the frame is completely put back together. Do a little function test. Basically, you can't manipulate the safety with the hammer down the way the 1911 is designed. So you're going to want to make sure you can't push that safety up, and it won't go up and lock. So from there, if you cock the hammer, safety will work, so that works. Now try pulling the trigger. Trigger won't pull. Now the grip safety here, to test the grip safety, when you put the weapon on fire and you pull the trigger, nothing should happen because that grip safety is properly working. Now if you actually hold in the grip safety with the weapon on fire and you pull the trigger, the hammer will come forward. So everything is working properly and as it should be. So your frame's back together, good operating condition. The only things that I did not touch upon was the trigger assembly, which I bought this pistol used, and if you can kind of tell on the camera, they stripped out that screw for the magazine release. So I can't actually take that out, and I haven't taken it to a gunsmith yet because I have no real hard feelings about getting rid of this trigger. I like the trigger, so I'm just going to keep it. So you can't take out the trigger assembly without taking out the magazine release. That's the only thing that's keeping it in. And since I can't take out mine, well, you're not going to be shown by me how to take it out. But it's pretty simple. You just basically undo that screw, and you can kind of take out that whole assembly, and then the trigger assembly will slide out from the rear. And other things that I didn't touch upon is the actual plunger assembly. This piece will actually come out, which I believe it's kind of staked into the frame. There's no real reason to take it out unless you're building the frame from the ground up and you need to put one in. But if you already have the frame built on the gun, don't ever worry about taking this off. And the same can also be said about the ejector. This, I believe, is also staked in, and there's no real point in taking it out for just a basic cleaning. But as you can see, put together, everything is working good. No problems or anything like that. And you don't need to do this every time you take apart your 1911 to clean it. But every once in a while it's good, because dust and dirt and oil and carbon buildup and everything can get in the trigger assembly group, and it can kind of like turn the trigger into kind of sluggish and crappy. And by taking out all that stuff, you can get, you know, in there and really clean out the frame and make sure everything's working right. Or, you know, like I just did, I just replaced my springs, and occasionally you have to do that just like a car. You can't just ride the car with the same set of struts and shocks and everything without expecting to have to maintain them and replace them every once in a while. And the same can be said about a pistol. Sometimes you gotta, you know, get in there and take apart the frame and get in there and, you know, replace some springs. But all in all, it's not that hard. If you have any questions, feel free to comment, and thank you for watching.